All right, let's dive in. We're tackling oligarchy today. You know, something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately.
Yeah, for sure.
And you've sent in a ton of sources, which is amazing. So clearly you guys want to go deeper than just like, the headlines.
Definitely.
Really get into like how it works and why it matters, especially right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what's so fascinating about this topic is we're going to be tracing it all the way back to ancient Greece.
Right?
We're going to see what the American founding fathers were so worried about with this, and then bring it all the way to like today.
Yeah, it's amazing how those historical examples can really illuminate
Yeah, they really.
what's happening in the world today.
Okay, so to kick things off, we are going all the way back over 2,000 years to ancient Greece.
Okay.
And I want to introduce you to this guy, Polybius.
Okay.
He was a historian who lived through the rise of the Roman Republic.
Right.
It was like a time of massive upheaval, kind of like watching your world just get completely like turned upside down by a new superpower.
And Polybius had skin in the game.
Ooh.
He wasn't just an observer.
Right.
He was taken hostage
Oh, wow.
by the Romans
Oh, no.
and actually lived among them for 16 years.
Wow. Okay.
So he saw firsthand
Yeah.
the fall of his civilization.
Wow.
And that really makes his obsession with figuring out Rome's success so intriguing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just academic for him at that point. It's personal.
Right?
So what was it about these Romans? He's
Yeah.
looking at these people and he's like, what is it that allowed them to go from like the underdog
Yeah.
to world dominator in just a few decades?
Yeah, and he was convinced that their political system was the secret weapon. He thought they had found a way to kind of break free from this
Okay.
cycle of governments that were constantly rising and falling.
Like the circle of life for governments.
Right, exactly.
I love it.
So Polybius called it anacyclosis,
Anacyclosis. Okay.
and it's this idea that governments follow this predictable pattern of rise and fall,
Okay.
like from kingship to tyranny, aristocracy to oligarchy,
Yeah.
democracy to mob rule, and then the whole thing starts over again.
Wow.
And this isn't just some ancient theory that faded away.
Right.
It actually resonated
Yeah.
with thinkers for centuries.
Really?
Even the American founding fathers were very concerned about this.
Wait, are you serious?
Absolutely.
Like the founding fathers, like the guys who wrote the Constitution, were reading Polybius and thinking about.
Yeah, they were very concerned
That's why.
about this cycle.
Wow.
John Adams, in fact, our
Yeah.
second president,
Yeah.
said that understanding this cycle
Yeah.
was basically the defining principle of his entire life.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it shows you how these ancient ideas about power, and governance and like the dangers of corruption, they have a really long reach.
Yeah.
And one of the fascinating things about Polybius is
No.
he really broke down how Rome succeeded.
Yeah.
And he believed that their so-called mixed constitution,
Right.
which blended, elements of kingship,
Yeah.
aristocracy, democracy, was the key.
That's right, yeah.
So he's saying that by combining these different forms of governance,
Yeah.
the Romans created this system that was more stable and resilient.
That's exactly it.
Oh, interesting.
They saw it as a way to balance power,
Yeah,
preventing any one group from becoming too dominant.
makes sense.
And if that sounds familiar, it's because this idea
Yeah.
of dividing power, having checks and balances,
Yeah.
deeply influenced
Yeah.
the framers of the U.S. Constitution.
Okay, so Rome had this mixed constitution. This was like their secret weapon against the cycle of anacyclosis.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about oligarchy.
Right.
So things must have gone wrong somewhere along the line, right?
Well, even Polybius knew that Rome's system wasn't foolproof.
Okay.
He understood that every form of government has its weaknesses,
Yeah.
and those weaknesses can eventually lead to its downfall.
So this perfect system wasn't so perfect after all.
Well, I mean, it was remarkable for
Yeah.
its time,
Right.
but even Rome eventually crumbled.
Right.
And some argue that its fall actually followed the very cycle
Oh, wow.
of anacyclosis
Really?
that Polybius had warned about.
That's a thought-provoking twist.
Yeah,
It's like this ancient echo
it is.
reverberating through history.
It highlights how even the most successful systems
Yeah.
can be vulnerable to decay.
Right?
What's important is to recognize those patterns, those warning signs,
Yeah.
and to understand how things can go wrong.
Okay, so we've got this historical backdrop
Yeah.
of how even a seemingly successful system like Rome's can falter.
Yeah.
But let's bring this into the present.
Right.
Let's really unpack like what an oligarchy is and how it operates in the modern world.
So, at its core, an oligarchy is a system
Okay.
where power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite group.
Okay.
And it's not just about being rich.
Right.
It's about using that wealth to gain and maintain power over others.
So it's like a select few are calling the shots.
That's right.
Regardless of what, the rest of the population thinks or needs.
That's the dangerous part.
Yeah.
This concentration of power often comes at the expense of everyone else,
Right.
leading to deep inequality and social divisions.
Now, I have to say, when I hear the word oligarchy, I immediately think of Russia.
Right.
It feels like the textbook example.
Yeah, definitely, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right, exactly. So in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union dissolved, it left this massive power vacuum.
Yeah.
What emerged was this new class of oligarchs who were able to, I don't know, exploit the chaos and just seize control of vast swaths of the Russian economy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great starting point.
So how did they do it? Was it just like being in the right place at the right time?
I think it was a combination of factors.
Okay.
Some of them were well-positioned,
Yeah.
but many of them actually engaged in a lot of predatory practices.
Like what? Give me some specifics.
I mean, manipulating privatization schemes, exploiting legal loopholes,
Oh, wow.
and even using intimidation tactics to acquire estate assets at ridiculously low prices.
Oh, man.
I mean, they gained control of everything.
Like what?
Oil and gas, metals, banking, media.
Wow.
They were everywhere.
So it's not just luck. It's about actively like exploiting a system in transition.
Absolutely.
Wow. And using any means necessary to gain wealth and power.
That's right.
What impact did this have on Russian society?
Pretty devastating, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
I mean, while these oligarchs were amassing these enormous fortunes, much of the Russian population was grappling with poverty and economic hardship.
It created this very stratified society then.
Yeah, it did. A tiny elite controlled a vast majority of wealth and resources.
And that concentration of wealth inevitably translates into political power, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In Russia, the lines between business and politics became so incredibly blurred.
Right.
Oligarchs used their wealth to influence elections, bribe officials, shape legislation in their favor.
Yeah.
They essentially captured these key institutions, ensuring that the system worked to maintain their power and increase their wealth.
It's like this self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly.
So we've got Russia as this like stark example.
Right.
But what about a country like the United States?
Yeah.
We pride ourselves on democracy.
Right.
Is oligarchy even a concern here?
The question of whether the U.S. is an oligarchy is a hotly debated one.
Right.
But there's no denying that there are oligarchic tendencies at play.
Okay, so what are some of those red flags then? What are people worried about?
One of the biggest concerns is the growing concentration of wealth among the top 1%.
Right.
This group holds a disproportionate amount of the nation's wealth.
Yeah.
And that translates into a disproportionate amount of political influence.
Right. So it's not just about having wealth, it's about how that wealth is then used.
It's definitely about how it's used.
Yeah.
We're talking about things like campaign financing, where wealthy individuals and corporations can pour vast sums of money into supporting candidates who align with their interests.
Right.
Then there's lobbying, where these same actors can exert influence on lawmakers to shape policies that benefit them, often at the expense of the public good.
So you're saying that even in a system with democratic institutions, concentrated wealth can really distort the playing field and undermine this idea of one person, one vote.
It creates a system where those with the most money have the loudest voices, and their interests are often prioritized over the needs of the majority.
It's like this feedback loop. Like wealth buys influence, influence shapes policies. Policies further entrench wealth.
Exactly.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
To think about.
And it's not just happening in the U.S.
Okay.
We're seeing similar trends in other countries.
Like give me another example of how this plays out on the world stage.
Take Ukraine, for instance.
Okay.
Similar to Russia.
Yeah.
Ukraine also saw this rapid rise of oligarchs following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
These individuals were able to seize control of key economic sectors, often through corrupt means.
Right.
And they've used their wealth to exert a lot of influence on Ukrainian politics.
So it's a similar pattern.
It is, yeah.
A power vacuum, rapid privatization, and then this small group of people just kind of capitalizing on the chaos.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, is this just like an inevitable consequence of these transitions?
I mean, it's a recurring theme.
Yeah.
And it highlights the vulnerability of systems in flux.
Now, you might be thinking, what about a country like China?
Right.
It's a communist state.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that preclude the rise of an oligarchy?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like communism would be the opposite of, a system where a few wealthy individuals hold all the power.
Well, it's a good question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of what an oligarchy really is.
Okay.
While China's political system is vastly different.
Right.
It also exhibits certain oligarchic tendencies.
So even under communism, you can still have this concentration of power.
Yes, but the dynamics are different.
Okay.
In China, the power isn't necessarily tied to private wealth in the traditional sense.
Right.
Instead, it's concentrated within the top echelons of the Communist Party.
Right.
This elite group controls key government institutions, state-owned enterprises, and the military.
So it's less about, individual billionaires and more about this powerful political class.
Exactly. And this control over state resources and institutions gives them immense power to shape policies, control the flow of information, and ultimately determine the direction of the country.
So it's like oligarchy can take different forms depending on the political and economic context.
That's right.
It's not just about billionaires buying yachts.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about a concentration of power.
Exactly.
And it's why it's so important to look beyond just the surface.
Right.
And really understand the underlying dynamics of how power operates in these different societies.
Yeah. And it is a trend worth paying attention to.
It's starting to feel like oligarchy is this global phenomenon.
It is,
Almost like this invisible force shaping events around the world.
Yeah.
Which is kind of alarming.
It underscores the importance of vigilance, critical thinking, and understanding the tools that oligarchs use to maintain their grip on power.
Okay, so let's dig into those tools. How do oligarchies stay in power?
So one of their most effective tactics is controlling the narrative.
Okay.
They understand that public perception is crucial to maintaining their power.
Okay.
So they go to great lengths to shape the information landscape.
How do they do that? That seems like a pretty subtle form of control.
It can be. One way is through media ownership. In a lot of countries, oligarchs have acquired significant stakes in media companies. This gives them direct influence over what gets reported and how it's framed.
So they essentially control the flow of information.
Exactly.
Promoting narratives that benefit them and suppressing those that might challenge their power.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. They also engage in very sophisticated public relations campaigns.
Okay.
They hire armies of lobbyists and often use philanthropic activities to bolster their public image.
Right, so it's like a multi-pronged strategy designed to really shape public perception and make sure that the system keeps working in their favor.
Exactly.
And another key element is this idea of undermining democratic institutions.
Absolutely.
So oligarchs recognize that things like a strong and independent judiciary, a free press, a vibrant civil society, these all pose threats to their power.
Absolutely.
So they actively work to weaken those institutions.
They do. They might try to influence judicial appointments. They may pressure or even threaten journalists.
Wow.
And they often fund organizations that spread disinformation or sow discord among the population.
So these individuals, driven by their own self-interest, are actively seeking to undermine the very foundation of a functioning democracy.
It's a sobering reminder that democracy is fragile.
Right.
It requires constant vigilance and active participation from citizens to protect it.
You mentioned controlling the narrative earlier. How does that tie into all of this?
It's all about shaping how people think and perceive the world.
Okay.
Oligarchs will often exploit existing societal divisions.
Okay.
They'll use things like fear, resentment, prejudice to pit groups against each other.
It's like that whole divide and conquer strategy.
Exactly. Wow. They understand that a fragmented and polarized society is less likely to challenge their power.
Right. It's much easier to control a population that's distrustful of each other.
Right.
So what can people do to combat this?
Well, it's not easy.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do.
Okay.
First and foremost, we need to be aware of these tactics.
Okay.
How they're being used to manipulate us.
Awareness is key.
Absolutely.
But what does that look like in practice?
It means being critical consumers of information.
Okay.
We need to question what we read, what we hear, especially from sources that might have a vested interest in pushing a particular narrative.
Right. That's where media literacy comes in, right? Being able to identify, reliable sources of information versus those that are spreading propaganda or misinformation.
Exactly.
And it also means supporting independent journalism.
Absolutely.
And organizations that are committed to holding power to account.
That's right.
So it's about being informed, engaged, and actively supporting those who are working to expose the truth and challenge those in power.
It is, And it's also about recognizing our own biases.
Okay.
And being willing to engage in constructive dialogue with those who hold different viewpoints.
That's so important because if we just retreat into our own echo chamber and demonize anyone who disagrees with us, then we're really just playing into the hands of those who benefit from division and polarization.
Absolutely.
This is a lot to process.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to see how it all fits together.
Okay.
Oligarchy isn't just about a few wealthy individuals.
Right.
It's the system of power that operates through these subtle and often insidious means.
Exactly.
It's about controlling the narrative, undermining institutions.
That's right.
And exploiting societal divisions to maintain control.
That's a great summary. And it highlights the complexity of the challenge we face.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Now let's talk solutions.
Right.
What can we actually do as individuals and as a society to push back against these oligarchic tendencies and protect our democratic institutions?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, right.
And it deserves a deep dive of its own.
I mean, that's a huge E question, right?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, it's a complex challenge, no doubt.
Right.
But it's not hopeless.
Okay, good.
You know, I think it's important to remember that oligarchies thrive in the shadows.
Okay.
They rely on secrecy, complexity, and the apathy of the masses.
Right.
So one of the most powerful weapons we have is shining a light on their activities.
Okay, I like that. Shining a light on the darkness, exposing their tactics, making it harder for them to operate in the dark.
Okay, but how do we do that practically? What are the tools we can use?
One key area is demanding transparency and accountability from our elected officials and institutions. We need to know who they're meeting with, what policies they're supporting, where their funding comes from.
It's about following the money, right?
It is,
And really like seeing who's pulling the strings.
We need robust investigative journalism that follows the money and exposes those networks of influence that often drive decision-making.
So supporting investigative journalism is crucial.
It is. Absolutely.
But it's not just about like, you know, the big media outlets, right?
Absolutely not.
Citizen journalists, bloggers, you know, social media activists.
Everyone has a role to play in holding power to account.
It really takes all of us, right?
It does, yeah.
Like being informed, being engaged citizens.
Absolutely.
Asking tough questions. Demanding answers. Not letting our leaders off the hook.
Exactly.
I'm sensing a theme here, which is, you know, be informed, be vocal, hold those in power accountable.
That's right.
But what about the deeper systemic issues that enable oligarchies to flourish in the first place? I mean, things like extreme wealth inequality, erosion of democratic institutions, the manipulation of information. These seem like such bigger problems to tackle.
They are,
How do we even approach that?
I mean, these issues didn't arise overnight. And they're not going to be solved overnight either.
Right.
It requires this long-term, multi-pronged approach that involves both individual actions and collective efforts.
Okay, break that down for me. Where do we begin?
I think on a personal level, it starts with educating ourselves, understanding how these issues impact our lives, and recognizing our own roles within the system.
So awareness and self-reflection
Absolutely.
are the first steps.
Yeah.
And then what?
Then we can start taking action.
Like what?
Supporting organizations and movements that are working to reform campaign finance laws, strengthen antitrust regulations, promote economic justice, and protect voting rights. It could involve becoming politically active, advocating for policies that address these issues, and holding our elected officials accountable for their actions.
So it's about finding the issues that resonate with us and then figuring out ways to get involved.
Exactly.
Whether that's through volunteering, donating, or just, raising awareness within our own communities.
Exactly.
And I think you're right. Like, collective action is key.
It is, yeah.
Throughout history, we've seen social movements achieve incredible things.
Absolutely.
By organizing, mobilizing, and demanding change.
That's right.
I mean, think about the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
The suffrage movement. Yeah. The fight for LGBTQ plus equality.
Yeah. These are all movements that faced seemingly insurmountable odds. But ultimately triumphed through the power of collective action.
That's inspiring, but also a bit daunting, right?
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, have we become too complacent?
Yeah.
Too willing to accept the status quo?
Complacency is definitely one of the biggest challenges we face.
Yeah.
Oligarchies thrive when people are apathetic, disengaged, cynical about the possibility of change. That's why it's so important to remember that our democracies are not self-sustaining. They require constant vigilance, active participation, and a willingness to fight for the values we believe in.
You mentioned cynicism. It does feel like there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, there is.
People are just so disillusioned with politics. Distrustful of institutions. Overwhelmed by the scale of the problems we face.
And that's exactly the kind of environment that oligarchs exploit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They want us to feel powerless. To believe that the system is rigged. That nothing we do can make a difference. Because when we feel that way, we're less likely to challenge their power.
So how do we combat that cynicism then? How do we convince people that their voices matter? And that change is possible?
I think part of it is about highlighting success stories. Showcasing examples of where people have come together to achieve meaningful change. Celebrating those victories, however small, and reminding people that progress is possible.
It's about finding those glimmers of hope amidst the darkness.
Exactly.
And
it's also about fostering this sense of shared responsibility, recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the future we want to see. We need to move beyond this idea that it's someone else's job to fix things. And embrace the power we have as individuals and as a collective.
I'm starting to feel a bit more empowered, I gotta say.
Good.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, which is information manipulation. It seems like we're living in this age of information overload.
Yeah, we are.
It's harder than ever to distinguish between truth and fiction.
Absolutely.
How do we navigate this landscape and become more discerning consumers of information?
Well, that's a crucial skill in today's world. And it's something we need to be actively teaching and promoting. Media literacy is more important now than ever. We need to be able to identify biases, recognize propaganda, and critically evaluate the information we encounter, especially online.
So it's about developing those critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
Asking those questions like, who created this information? What's their agenda? What evidence do they have?
Exactly. And it's also about diversifying our sources of information. Exposing ourselves to different perspectives. And engaging in respectful dialogue.
Yes, I love that. Respectful dialogue.
With those who hold different viewpoints.
It seems like we've lost that art of, like, disagreeing constructively.
We have.
And I think we need to rediscover that.
Absolutely.
Because when we shut down conversations, when we demonize those who think differently, we create this environment where,
we do.
Misinformation and polarization thrive.
Exactly.
And we're playing into the hands, again, of those who benefit from that division.
Absolutely.
Right.
So let's make a conscious effort to break out of our echo chambers.
Right.
To listen with an open mind.
Yeah.
And to engage in conversations that challenge our assumptions and broaden our understanding of the world.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
We started by exploring this ancient concept of anacyclosis.
Right.
Kind of dove into these modern manifestations of oligarchy all around the world.
Yeah.
And now we've landed on this set of concrete actions that we can all take to actually combat this trend.
And remember, it's not about doing everything perfectly.
Right.
It's about taking those small steps.
Okay.
Finding your own way to get involved.
Yeah.
And recognizing that even those small acts of resistance can have this ripple effect.
I love that.
Yeah.
Small acts of resistance. It makes it feel less overwhelming and more manageable.
Exactly. Change happens gradually.
Right.
Through the collective efforts of countless individuals.
Right.
Who refuse to accept the status quo.
Right.
And are willing to fight for a better world.
So, to our listeners out there, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we really encourage you to explore the source material further.
That's right.
All the links are in the episode notes.
Absolutely.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.
That's right.
Until next time.
See you then.